purpose of this tutorial is to do a counter control loop. This is where we have a variable that changes and controls whether or not the loop is going to increase, or I'm sorry, the loop is going to continue. So this program deals with this program here that has the user enter in 7 days worth of bottle collections and then calculates the total number of bottles plus the amount paid out, assuming there's a 10 cents refund on each bottle. So in the pseudocode that you're going to complete, step 1 will give you specific directions on what to do. So the first thing that it's asking you to do, we're going to go down to step 3, which has the entire main program. But we're going to follow in step 1 where it asks for us to declare variables. So right here, if you look back at step 1, it says create a variable called total bottles that is initialized to 0. And this would be of the data type integer, because assuming we cannot collect a half of a bottle, total bottles equals 0. And then it also says this variable will store the accumulated bottles value. So that's the purpose of that variable. Now the next thing as you're going through step 1 is just create a counter variable that is initialized to 1. So again, declare integer counter equals 1. So you're going to follow that from step 1. Now in step 2, this is where our function calls are going to be. But if we look at step 2 first, and we'll come back to step 3, what it says is to create a function call to get bottles that passes 3 variables. So that's simply done by saying get bottles. That's going to be the name of our function or our method, and we're going to pass these as arguments. So get bottles, today bottles, and counter. And then you're going to finish your function calls by following the directions in step 2. Now at the beginning of step 3, what it does tell you to do is write a condition controlled while loop around your function calls using the keep going variable that you would have created here. So while keep going is equal to yes, and then input keep going. So what you're going to have here is a complete main program where you have your variables declared, you have a loop that will allow them to run it multiple times, and you have right inside of here your function calls. Now in step 4, what we need to do is to code the get bottles module. Now our module is called get bottles, which is already defined, and we already have a function call for it. Now what we need to add in A is the missing parameter list. Well, this missing parameter list is going to match your function call. So you'll notice your function call accepts or passes total bottles, today bottles, and counter. So what you're going to put here are your arguments, or is your parameter list to accept that. So integer total bottles, integer today bottles, and integer counter. In step B, we're going to add our missing condition. Now counter is going to be our loop control variable. So the hint here is that that counter must run 7 times. So while counter is less than or equal to 7, we're going to run this loop to take in 7 days worth of bottle returns. Now since we started counter at 1, it would be less than or equal to 7. If we started it at 0, it would just be less than 7. And we could also write it as counter less than 8 if we initialized it to 1, and it would do the same thing. Step C is the missing input variable. So what we're trying to do here is enter the number of bottles returned for the day. So that would be today's bottles. So, and that variable is called today bottles. Now step D is the missing accumulator. An accumulation statement is always done the same way. What we're trying to do here is to basically keep track of total bottles, which is total bottles equals total bottles plus whatever they return today. So say on the first iteration of the program we returned 100 bottles. 100 bottles then gets added into total bottles. And on the second iteration of the loop, if I returned 300 bottles, then 300 bottles gets added to the 100 that's already there to make 400. And it keeps accumulating all of the values until the loop ends. Now step E is to add an increment for your counter, and this is so counter changes so that at some point this loop will end. So that's done by saying counter equals counter plus 1. Now in step 5, what you're going to do is your parameter list, and that matches your function call. And then here the calculation to multiply the total bottles times 10% and store that into total payout. What you're going to do in step 6 is to simply, again, match up your parameter list, and then you do your display statements to print out the requested information, which is the total number of bottles and the total payout.